Chuck, it could not be a more beautiful Victoria day out there, could it?
No kidding, Marty. Yeah, what a day. And if I may
Please.
add, this is the first time we're doing this podcast in front of a live studio audience.
Live studio audience. And you know what? The live studio audience helped us formulate today's topic. Did they not?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
She did. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so the question that was put out was around what would someone who's not military want to know from you and I about a military experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how would you interpret the answer that we got? I'd like to hear your space.
Well, I think the answer we got was that it was very limited in terms of what we tell people who are not in the military about us. It tends to be limited to Remembrance Day, or if there's some kind of tragedy or something makes the news, but we're not good at it. Let's be honest. And in spite of the fact that we have an entire branch of the armed forces whose only job is to talk to the public about us. And I know that they're good folks. We all know,
Absolutely.
public affairs individuals, and they work hard, but we just don't seem to. I'm not sure if I could do a better job, but there's something lacking for sure.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, especially when we're talking about the education space. And so I come back to years ago, I worked at an 1812 museum when I was in high school. And we had a really good program that worked with the schools in the area to talk about what 1812 meant to the region of Stony Creek, Hamilton. That whole sort of was all live and part of the transition as people were coming north trying to get to York. But if I said today, how many schools have any semblance of a military education around what took place in Afghanistan?
Yeah, very little. Yeah, if any.
Yeah. What took place in Gulf War I or II in the Canadian contribution?
Now, part of that, to be fair to the schools, might be that those were not existential threats to us in the homeland, whereas the War of 1812 was. Right? We were
Absolutely.
invaded, but that doesn't diminish the need for us to educate our younger Canadians in the way that we do about the major conflicts that we've been in. But I dare say we could walk up the street to the high school that's 400 meters from here and ask about the siege of Khartoum, Charles Gordon, and they would sort of look at us and, what are you talking about? I said, well, you realize that French Canadians paddled up the Nile to save Gordon at Khartoum. What?
Well, exactly. And, so I come back to that history repeating itself, that in the news today, you can't go a single day without hearing about the Straits of Hormuz.
Right.
I lived there for the better part of a year, 22 years ago.
Yeah.
And somehow in those 22 years, we seem to have forgotten its importance to global trade.
We're dipping our toe into a very large lake here, you and I, that is called education.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to have lost our way as a culture. Now, not just Canada, but the whole Western world. When you look, for instance, at what you had to know before you would be allowed to graduate from high school with a senior matriculation in 1925, you had to know more to graduate from high school in Ontario in 1925 than most universities require now for a 3-year bachelor's.
Yes.
So, and I don't like the term dumbing down. I don't think that's fair. I think it's more a question of lessening expectations, right? That there's a growing anti-intellectual bias in society. Just look at what's happening in the media sphere and our denial of expertise, led by the Americans, right?
Absolutely.
And you need to wonder and ask yourself, well, why would that be? Why would, after centuries of praising expertise, would we have turned the corner now so suddenly in a matter couple of decades and deny expertise, right? Alternate facts. And it's not just MAGA in the United States. It's everywhere. Now, some people think it's the internet. I don't know what it is. Could be the internet, where information is so easy to find and there isn't anyone there to verify.
Yeah, our last podcast that we just put out literally talked about Dunning-Kruger.
Yes.
And the fact that people who don't know often act as if they know.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be one of the most dangerous things.
Yep.
Because a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And I never want to make someone responsible for not knowing what they don't know.
Right.
But I think there's an opportunity here for you and I, especially around expertise. You're an expert in many of the topics around military that we speak on today. But if I said to you, this Remembrance Day upcoming, what would you want any of the kids in the high school that's 400 meters from us to know? What I don't know that there's a crafted message from the CF to let your average high school student know about the value of the Canadian military. How would you craft that?
That's, as usual, Marty, you asked such good questions. I think if I were put in charge for this upcoming Remembrance Day, I would shift the focus a little bit, because we honor the fallen on November the 11th. But I think we do it at the expense of those who still serve or those who have served and survived, because it has left a mark on all of us. Most of us have left with a very positive set of marks, I think. An awful lot, an unfortunately large number have left with a lot of negative marks on their psyches, on their bodies, on their personalities. And I think, the Americans, they don't do a lot of things that I like better than us. One of the things that we should consider is they have a Memorial Day and a Veterans Day. So the Memorial Day is for those who fell. November the 11th for us, right? They have a Veterans Day where they celebrate veterans who are still around to enjoy the celebration. And it's a big deal, as you know. I don't know if you ever watch the ceremonies. And like everything Americans do, they're a little bit over the top, right? I mean, the last thing I think that soldiers, sailors, and aircrew want are fireworks, but but some people love them,
especially those with PTS. Because
exactly. But we don't do that. We don't have a day when we celebrate. Now, we have an Armed Forces Day, right? And I know at the Canadian National Exhibition as a kid, I would always go down to C&E on Armed Forces Day, because that was when the snowbirds did their final flights, right? And all the uniforms were there, and the 3 different services. All these big machines were there for us to be allowed to crawl around. And on one occasion, as a young officer, I had to go as part of the demo. But that's small potatoes compared to a national holiday, where we just tell everybody to let's take a break for a sec and remember that we have a military in this country, and they're still serving, and they serve 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no such thing as a holiday. Yeah, they go home for holidays, but when the phone rings, they get up from the Christmas dinner table and say, sorry, gotta go, right? And I don't think that we recognize that enough. There's a distinction there.
No, there's an absolute distinction there. Because what we're talking about is, how do we treat the still serving and the veteran that are among us today?
Yeah.
We're very good. And I just even recall last year when I went to a Remembrance Day ceremony, I was with my granddaughter, and they were talking, and there was so much emphasis put on World War II and so much emphasis put on Korea. And it felt like Afghanistan was just like a little footnote that they just kind of like, oh yeah, and by the way, we went there too.
Yeah.
But your average person didn't have a connection to it unless they had family part of it.
Right.
I mean, you know who had family part of it, because they'll tell you.
Yeah.
I had an uncle. I had a grandmother. I had a they'll bring it right out because of that live connection to it. But with the forces, it's probably less than 1% of the population. That's a lot of the population that isn't necessarily connected directly.
Yes.
What do you think would be some of the educational pieces that we need to put in place to have people understand? Do we need a documentary about who we are? Do we need thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know. That's a tough one. But I think this goes back that you've flashed a memory that we talked about in a previous podcast about, having an issue with the teachers in Laura when my kids were little,
Yes.
about saying that people with guns are bad. It goes back to something that we were just touching upon before we began recording, the difference between education and training.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned to you that in the German military, my directing staff at the War College was pointing out that at least in their military, they had a tendency that they educated officers, but they tended to form soldiers, right, in the army. The two words mean something different in German. Ausbildung, build up, education, and Prägung, which is pressing or forming, right? And that, at least my directing staff, who's quite an enlightened officer, he was trying to get us as young officers to understand that it was our responsibility as leaders not to focus on one or the other, but that we had to do both to all of the people that we asked to follow us, that we had an obligation to both educate and to form in a positive way. And that it was a bigger challenge than what we might think. And I think that the armed forces at large, back to the Canadian forces, has that same responsibility. We need to educate the Canadian public because we draw exclusively from the Canadian public, right? And we also had a responsibility to form the public's opinions, not just educate them, but to form their opinions so that they understood what we were doing in a more positive light. Does that go anywhere near answering your question?
No, it's perfect. And it actually harkens back to a little bit of what we were doing when we were talking about military in terms of industry and how Canada is poised in a position where our industry can do amazing things. And we're certainly seeing a huge amount of industry and military coming together today in a way we haven't ever seen before, which is amazing. But most people don't know about it.
Right.
And that's sort of the space. It's almost like we've never had anything to say why having a military, like everyone knows, we talked about this in another podcast too. Everyone knows why you have to have a firefighter nearby.
Right.
No one questions the fact that there are fire departments everywhere, and we are grateful for those firefighters.
Yes, we are.
There does not seem to be the equivalent understanding as to why we have a base where we do and what the function of that is.
Yes. Yes. And I know that the armed forces has tried because, in my youth, we purposely separated the base from the community that it was in. So we had a lot of military housing. We had a lot of functions on the base. We were almost proud of the fact that we didn't integrate with the community. And then the decision was made, well, we need to integrate the military in the communities with the Canadian public at large. We started drawing down military housing and getting rid of our social functions that were exclusive to the base. And I think we went from one extreme to the other. Almost, it was almost binary from a 0 to a 1, as opposed to, well, could we get sort of halfway there, make our bases more acceptable or accessible at the same time with providing everything service members need on the base? I'm not sure. I don't know. I think it's a very large challenge that we've tried to meet, and now we're going back to the way, right? I mean, CFP is final, which 10 minutes from here, they're expanding by what, 50% this year?
Oh, yes.
And they're building an enormous number of housing units, ostensibly because life in Victoria is so expensive that
Mm-hmm.
salaried military can't afford to live off the base. That's partially true. That's a really good reason to do what we're doing. But there's more to it than that.
Well, perfect. You've just gone to exactly what I was thinking, which is there's more to it than that. That expansion is not coming from nowhere. That expansion is coming because we have a government and a realization that there is an uncertainty in the world larger than other uncertainties and threats we've had before.
Correct.
Now,
recently. Right.
So if I were to say, for someone who may not understand what the threats are in the world, how would you describe, with the 10 minutes we have left, why this is so important? What's going on in the world that makes today different?
What's going on? Well, it stems primarily from a sense of uncertainty. Uncertainty politically, which then drives uncertainty economically, which then drives uncertainty socially. And there's this low-level anxiety that has been induced in everyone's life. And we see it everywhere. I mean, we were talking about raising funds for our veterans here in Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, you know, I'm part of a team that raises money. And you can see that people want to be generous, but there's a little bit of anxiety. Well, can I really afford to give you $100 when the price of groceries has doubled in the last year? I'd love to give you money. And, you know, and I explain to people who phone me and ask me for money. It's like, okay, I'm on a fixed income as a retiree. This is what I can afford. Well, can you increase that by $25 a month? Well, maybe, but I'd hate to call you back 6 months from now and say, I got to pull that back. I'd rather give you what I know I can give you. Right. And I'm blessed. I mean, I don't have any financial issues right now. So I'm in that small segment of society that really doesn't have to worry, which means that there's a huge segment of society that does have to worry, that does need to know that, ooh, I need to fill the car up again. Can I afford to? Right? I mean, these are first world problems, to be sure, whereas the rest of the world has issues like, am I going to be able to feed my kids tomorrow because I don't have a refrigerator, it's not full, you know, but still, it's all there. It's all part of the background noise that works on our psyche. You know, it's that water dripping on the stone. That it's not a lot of water, but if it drips long enough, it's going to carve a channel in that stone. So we have an armed forces to help us for when the water does crack that stone. It may not be in our lifetime, but these are skills that are hard learned. And once you lose them, they're almost impossible to get back. I'm not sure that's a message that we share with everybody. We know it. You know it. I know it.
No. Certainly in the military, you know that. But again, I'm going to come back to that high school that's right by us. I'm sure that there are probably a number of students in that school today saying, why are we spending all this money on military when we could spend it on education, healthcare, something? Tell me why that's so important, this combating of uncertainty.
Well, you know, I don't know if you ever took any courses in basic economics, but there's an argument called guns and butter, right? It's a very famous argument that tries to explain the difference between macroeconomics, large scale economics, and microeconomics. So guns, in order to have money in the government that supports the building of arms manufacturing, money's got to come from somewhere. It isn't endless. And so tax dollars are spent on building this infrastructure and having armed forces, which takes money away from butter, supporting farmers, helping people produce food, helping those people who can't afford the food, buy food, give food, shelter, all of that stuff. So it's a facile argument. It's unusually simple, and facile implying it's stupid to think this. It's a facile argument to think that you don't need to spend money on both, that you can focus on one and let the other one go. And let's face it, for the last 20 years or so, we've had a series of governments of all stripes who have said, yeah, we can downplay what we spend on the military because the Americans will protect us. Right?
You know what I love about what you just said is it ties back to what we were saying earlier in the same podcast. When you said, we've got a world that is somehow devaluing the expert, we seem to be valuing what you're calling the facile argument.
Yes.
And that, because this is simple, I can sell a facile argument. I can make it popular. I can get everybody in the world to agree to my facile argument.
Mm-hmm.
Efficacy be damned.
Yes.
Expertise be damned. I just have to make it popular long enough that I can make it through my term.
Yes. Yes. And that's, this takes us back to something that I don't know if we spend a lot of time talking about it, but my concern that we have an ill-educated electorate. Okay. I'm not calling the voters stupid because they're not, but they are ill-educated. In fact, I was just wondering this morning to myself whether there's a market. You were teasing me when you arrived that, every time you visit, I have a new book. It's because I don't sleep and I haven't got a life. But I was wondering if there's a market for a book that explains the political system to high school students that would prompt them to want to vote. Right? Not that they feel obliged to vote, but to physically say, yeah, Mom, Dad, on polling day, I'm coming with you because I'm now old enough to vote. And I'm going to put down my Game Boy or whatever. I'm going to stop watching Netflix for an hour and I come with you and I'm going to cast my ballot.
As you say that, I think I know I'm old enough, but probably the last generation to understand the concept of civics or civic duty.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen civics or civic textbooks that made it out of the 60s.
I don't think so. I think we stopped teaching it. I don't know why. Because it was a common good that grade 8 rings a bell with me, that's when we learned how parliament works, how government works. Having this memory, grade 8, maybe grade 9 as well. But after that, it was one of those things. Oh no, we don't need to worry about that. That's useless knowledge. Everybody will vote. Well, everybody doesn't vote. I mean, I think the highest number of Canadians as a percentage who voted in a federal election since we started keeping track is like 66%. Okay. And that may seem like a pretty good number, but that means that there's 34% or 1 in every 3 Canadians just doesn't bother.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And that probably comes from the lack of understanding of the process.
I like to think so. I don't think it's willful negligence.
No.
I think it's ignorance of the system and, the old argument, well, I'm just one vote.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Although that argument resonates now with people in that suburb of Montreal where the seat was won by 1 vote last year.
Mm-hmm.
What's the riding? I can't remember.
Yeah, no, but it's true.
Yeah.
Enough of our 1 votes.
Yeah.
Change everything.
Yeah.
And so I think you're really onto something, Chuck. I think there's a space there. I have spent most of 2026 writing 1 book in the space that I think you've published 4.
Whatever.
but I bring that up specifically because I think you've got something there with that education piece. That as much as you have a brilliant expertise, and for our listeners, we know that there's a brilliant expertise here. I think there's a wider audience for something that you've got. And maybe this podcast, we will look back at this podcast in a year and go, hey, remember that book series Chuck published? Because he's going to publish 5 between now and next year. the electorate, the parliament, your military, your economics, your civics. There's your first 5 books.
There we go. I think that'll round it out to 10, 11. I don't know.
I think you're at 11 already on Amazon.
Luckily, I don't do it for the money. I do it because I got too much to say.
That's right. And I want to thank you for taking your time to say what you had to say today. And I want to thank our listeners for listening. And I want to thank the wonderful studio audience who gave us the brilliant question to begin with.
Yes. Excellent.
Till next time, Chuck.
Okay, Marty. Take care.